If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. It's Halloween in about 76 days. People, tell me your spookiest, creepiest stories you have ever heard or seen. When my mom was a kid, she lived in this particular house with her 6 siblings. She's told me dozens of stories about things flying off shelves, furniture moving, voices and noises, etc. I won't go into all of them, but suffice it to say that they're pretty creepy, and I've actually seen my mom cry talking about them. Most of her siblings won't even talk about it if it gets brought up, which it almost never does. Now that's creepy enough, but everyone has a haunted house story, right? Well, that's not the end. A friend of mine lived in that same house for a time when we were still in school. Mind you, this friend had never met my mom. Even after I found out where he lived, I didn't bring up anything about what my mom said went on there. The first time I went over to his house, he told me and another friend of ours that he wanted to hang out outside because his room freaked him out. He said his stuffed animals would go flying off the shelves, he'd see shadows all the time, he'd hear men talking from the basement. It was a wood-heated house at one time, so there were vents from the basement to the top floor, and sometimes his bed would shake or move around while he was trying to sleep. He said that once, it felt just like someone punched his bed from underneath. After I went home that day, I told my mom about it. All she said, really softly, was, "He sleeps in the L-shaped bedroom, doesn't he?" That was my room. He did. Here's one that scared the living shite out of me when I was younger. A young boy is sleeping in his bed on a normal night. He hears footsteps outside his door and peeks out of his eyes to see what is happening. His door swings open quietly to reveal a murderer carrying the corpses of his parents. After silently propping them up on a chair, he writes something on the wall in the blood of the dead bodies. He then hides under the child's bed. The child is scared beyond belief. He can't read the writing on the wall, and he knows the man is under his bed. Like any child, he pretends that he slept through the whole thing and hasn't awoken yet. He lays still as the bodies move, quietly hearing the breaths from under his bed. An hour passes, and his eyes are adjusting more and more to the darkness. He tries to make out the words, but it's a struggle. He gasps when he finally makes out the sentence. "I know you're awake." He feels something shift underneath his bed. When I was a child, my family moved to a big old 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both of my parents worked, so I was often alone when I came home from school. One early evening, when I came home, the house was still dark. I called out, "Mom?" and heard her singing voice say, "Yes?" from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in and again got the same yes reply. We were decorating at the time, and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms, but she was in one of the far ones, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I figured that was only natural, so I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing that her presence would calm my fears, as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, I heard the front door downstairs open and my mother call, "Sweetie, are you home?" in a cheery voice. I jumped back, startled, and ran down the stairs to her, but as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door to the room slowly opened a crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there, and I don't know what it was, but it was staring at me. I think I've got this one beat. It called itself a curio emporium. My friend took me there. From the outside, it looked pretty small, but it actually went back a really long way. There were too many shelves and stacks of items to be able to tell that by looking in the windows. There were 2 electrical items in the entire shop that I was aware of, dim bare bulb lighting and a card machine. The shop sold things from all over the world. They had masks from Africa, old scientific equipment, furniture, taxidermy, including foxes that looked like they'd been killed mid-scream and which you could turn a corner and come face to face with, and loads of figurines, some mechanical. There were 2 life-size statues of men in suits in the window. The shop was attached to a house on one side. The windows and doors of this house were completely bricked up. There was a door on that side of the shop that had a heavy bureau in front of it. The woman behind the counter, when she spoke at all, spoke about him. I assumed she was talking about her husband, though she never gave me a name. This, she told me, was his collection, his shop. He'd be coming back soon to take it off her hands. When you weren't engaging her in conversation, the shop was almost silent. The only sounds were the buzz of the lights, the whirring of a mechanical figure that she never seemed to wind up, and the bell on the door. The door itself was a dark blue, with a faded label on the outside that said "Don't." When I was a kid, I was staying at some family friend's hobby farm. Me and their boy Sean, We were both around 11 or 12, got up, and I gave him a hand doing his chores on the farm. As we walked up to the barn, we heard a big commotion in the chicken coop. As we walked up to the coop, I noticed motion in the chicken wired 2x6 window. Me and Sean are standing 15 feet away from the coop window. I verified with Sean later that we both saw a man appear on the right side of the window. As he floated, or possibly rollerbladed, by the window, he slowly looked over at us, and as if finding us wanting, he turned away and continued out of sight. I will never forget the look on that face. It was the face of an old man who was bloated and severely ill. Unfortunately, it was a face that seemed very familiar. Both me and Sean thought it was his father. His father at the time was a healthy and fit 45-year-old, but we were both left with the impression that we had seen his father. Anyway, we rush up to the coop to see what's going on. There was nothing there except agitated chickens doing their thing. Me and Sean talked about it for the rest of the day and could make no sense of it. His dad had been gone running errands since 5 a.m. and didn't return until later that afternoon. Me and Sean never talked about it after that day. In hindsight, I can see why it became taboo. I fell out of touch with Sean as I got older, until I got a call from my parents to let me know that Sean's dad had passed away from cancer and gave me information on his service. The service was at the old hobby farm. Being there brought back a lot of memories, but I'm sure I wasn't thinking about me and Sean's spooky incident. My brain had filed that under miscellaneous long ago and forgotten about it. Right up until I saw a certain picture in a collection of images from Sean's father's life. The picture that caught my eye was one taken a few weeks before he passed. There he was holding his newly born granddaughter, and I guarantee you that he was the same man I saw looking over at me and Sean that happily forgotten day from our childhoods. There's no doubt about it. When I saw the face, I was immediately transported back to that moment. All the smells, doubts, and fears. I guess that's it. I am agnostic, loathe superstition, and by no means wish to contribute to it, but this did happen to me. I'm one of 5 kids, and so growing up, I shared a bed with my little sister. She had intense nightmares that were probably worsened by the fact that when she woke up screaming, my preacher father would come in and pray over us so that the demons in the room leave this place. One night, I woke up because I felt someone staring at me. My sister was fast asleep with her eyes wide open and glaring at me with this horrible expression. It freaked me out so bad that I shook her awake, and she started shrieking "Get out" over and over, with her hands clamped to her face like she didn't want to see anything. Mama and Daddy tried giving her a bath to calm her down. She was little, like 5, and baths helped sometimes, but when she wouldn't stop screaming, they took her to the ER. She was severely dehydrated, but the doctors never really figured out what was wrong with her. P.S. This wasn't the only crazy stuff. She used to shake me awake, wailing, "There's a snake in the bed." Or "There's a spider on your face." And would be inconsolable for hours. Weird hallucinating 5-year-old girl, FTW. We were camping at a spot we hiked a few miles up to. For NW folks, we were by Brown Creek, close to the high steel bridge across the railroad trestle. As if hiking across the trestle fully loaded with camping and hiking gear wasn't scary enough. Read on. To set this up, there was a massive logging hill that was in view of our campsite. It's shown on the map, but it wasn't covered in trees when we went. We hiked around it while it was light out. There was literally no road access here. The roads shown on the map were all blocked off by either 6-foot impassable trenches or massive mounds of dirt that would have required a rock crawler to get over. There was no way a human could have gotten on that hill in the dark, and since we hiked around it fairly late in the evening to gather water from the stream, there was no way someone could have gotten in and set up camp without us noticing. Fast forward to around 1 a.m. It's completely blacked out. There are no lights or civilization for miles, other than a farm or two a few miles back. We're sitting around the fire, bullshitting, and drinking. All of a sudden, I noticed a light moving right where the hill was when it was light out. It was bobbing back and forth like a person walking with a flashlight. There was no conceivable way up this hill in the dark. It was logged and regrown, which meant lots of heavy brush covering the entire thing. Any access via vehicle, we would have heard other than us talking and the crackle of the fire. Everything was silent. The light bobbed around the hill for well over an hour, as if someone were just wandering. They would have easily been able to see us sitting around the fire from that high vantage point. We called out to it or them. We tried to get a little closer, but there was no negotiating the terrain on the hill at night. No answer. We heard some faint rustling of the brush, that was all. It was pretty damn creepy, and we never did figure out what it was. We hiked around and up the hill the next morning, but there were no signs of any activity or of the roads being any more passable than they were the day before. I live in the backwoods of the North Georgia mountains, and it makes for some great hiking, camping, and wood smoking. Anyway, my brother and I went out for a 10-mile hike last weekend before all the snow came down. When we get on the trail, we're probably about 15 to 20 miles from the nearest town. This area was freaking isolated. We were walking for a few hours, trying to find somewhere to camp, when we heard this god-awful shrieking. It wasn't just screaming, it had this blood-freezing shrill frequency that I didn't think anyone could possibly reach. After the screaming subsided, we heard this barking in the distance, followed by whoops and hollers that, to me, sounded like drunken hillbillies. I was playing that horrible scene from Deliverance over and over in my head, and we did not feel safe at all. After about 10 minutes of listening to this, we hauled ourselves to where the sounds were coming from, fearing what we would find. The sun set, and we stupidly were still floundering about in the woods, carrying nothing between us but a few meals worth of food, a few grams of pot, sleeping bags, and a tent. It was dark, we were scared out of our minds, and I just wanted to get the hell out of the woods and back to my car. At around 8, the sun had long set, and we were wandering around shivering with flashlights. We didn't have any weapons on us, just multi-tools. Brennan just said, "Screw it. Let's set up camp here." We knew we were lost, and we were as cold as Satan's rectum. We set up our tent haphazardly, piled in, and slept uneasily. The next morning, Bren prodded me awake. He was shaking, either from cold or fear. I figured our tent's rain fly had been torn off by the wind. We stepped outside and promptly both almost spit ourselves out. The tent fly was torn to shreds on the ground, the stakes were upended, and there was a ducking noose hanging from the tree across the clearing. Naturally, we broke camp and ran almost 4 miles through the woods to come out by a road, followed the road to where I parked, and got the hell out. In my 19 years of living in the middle of nowhere, I've never felt that vulnerable in the woods. When I was about 10, my father decided to move into this large house in the middle of a forest. Very creepy, classic cabin in the woods type of house. The backyard was really just this forest that dragged on forever. One time when I was 11 or 12, I took a look out the window, pondering if I wanted to go on a hike, and I found someone staring back at me. Multiple people. Clowns. Ducking clowns were slowly walking towards my house from the midst of the woods. I immediately ran and told my dad. He grabbed his handgun and went off to meet them. They walked away over a hill, and he vanished with them. He didn't come back for several hours. It wasn't until many years later that I learned what the insane clown posse was. Turns out they were holding a concert at a nearby field, and those guys got high as duck and somehow wandered a mile over to us. Outside of Huntsville, Texas, there's a road they call Demon Road that runs parallel to another road. In between is an old cemetery and a dirt road connecting the two roads. Rumor has it that on Demon Road a few years ago, there was a car accident and a police shootout that left 2 people dead. The car was never taken from the spot where it crashed, and the angry spirits never left. About 4 years ago, I went down there with some friends to investigate. We parked on the dirt road, and a truck pulled in from the other side, KC daylighters on, blinding me. A woman got out, and I thought I was going to die. Technically, we were trespassing. She walked to my window and said, "Be careful." She got back in her truck and drove off. I got out, rubbed some dirt on my car in an attempt to reveal fingerprints, and headed down Demon Road. About 1/4 mile down the road, I felt a cold punch on my chest and froze in my tracks. I tried to walk forward and again felt a press on my chest. I turned back to my car with a friend while everyone else continued. I decided something was telling me it was a bad idea to continue. About 30 minutes later, the group came back, and we started comparing pictures, audio, and mass spec readings. We caught some quality pictures and mass spec readings, but no audio. One of the girls asked the guy next to her, "Why did you pull my hair?" He said he didn't, and about 10 seconds later, she screamed, "Something jerked my ponytail," and we scrambled back to our cars and sped back to the city. When we got back to civilization, I got out and saw handprints and finger drawings all over my car. The most compelling were the 2 smeared handprints on my trunk, like someone was hanging on, lost grip, and slid down the trunk. The Roman numeral 12 was also fingered into the dust. I don't try to make sense of what happened that night, but that will always be burned into my mind as the absolute scariest encounter of my life. I was 15. Hiking out in the deep woods in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, in Washington State. With my cousin, who was 13. We heard a grunt coming from the side of the trail, just out of sight, behind some trees. I ignored it at first until it got louder and closer. I thought maybe it was a bear, but it kept following us, just out of sight. All we could see was a black shadow and the unceasing huff-grunt-huff sound. After about 2 minutes, it left. I'm still not sure what it was. And no, I don't really think it was a Sasquatch, but what the hell was it? A lot of my family went to visit some of our relatives in a small town in South Texas. My cousins and I have seen some interesting things at night. Hovering lights high in the sky, UFOs with amber lights moving in and out of V formation. It was all really cool stuff. But it was always just things in the distance. This time around, my siblings, cousins and their wives, and my wife were all sitting outside on the porch, coincidentally, reminiscing about some of the things we saw when we were younger. It was one of the few times we spoke about these things with our wives, let alone people outside the family. Anyway, we were all sitting on the benches along the house and the rail on the porch. My wife and I were sitting at one of the ends, not really talking, just listening to the stories. Out of nowhere, I noticed two small white hands, almost with a blue hue, holding on to the roof of the house. As soon as I noticed the hands, a white head slowly popped out like it was peeking down at us and then receded. It happened too quickly for me to look up, even though I noticed the hands in my peripheral vision for a good second or two. I didn't say anything to anyone at that point. I was shocked at what had happened. This might sound crazy to some, but I know whatever it was that I saw wasn't from this planet. For about the next 15 minutes, I had this strange feeling. It's not like I was being watched, but more like there was something very unfamiliar around. My wife and I then headed to bed for the night. I didn't want to tell her about what I saw because she scares easily, but I just had to get it off my mind. I told her I noticed something peeking down at us, and she told me she saw it as well. She actually got a look at it. She said it was a white egg-shaped head. Like if an egg was upside down and at an angle. She saw its eyes, which were dark and oval-shaped. She didn't see the nose or mouth because it didn't peek out of its entire head. We couldn't sleep for a good hour or two. Our uncle's house is on a large plot of land. It's not too rural, but the neighbor's house is a good 100 yards in either direction, and the only light outside that night was the floodlight in between the house and the garage. It was a very tense night, as I kept waking up out of fear that night. We've tried to tell our siblings and cousins about what we saw, but somehow, after all we've seen, they don't believe us. I grew up in a small town and lived out in the country. My mom and I were coming home from Walmart really late one night and decided to take the back way home. I still had my learner's permit, so I wanted to take a road with less traffic. Anyone who has ever lived in or been to the country knows how creepy these roads can be at night. I was going around a curve, right before a one-lane bridge, so I slowed down in case I had to stop. Out of nowhere, this woman jumps in front of me to the driver's side of my car and starts pounding on the hood of my car. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. My mom started freaking out and told me not to stop and just keep driving. I kept going, and we both looked back to see where she was, but no one was there. To this day, my mom and I still remember it clearly. Turns out there's apparently a legend about a woman who died around the bridge and can be seen sometimes late at night. I get goosebumps to this day just thinking about it. Camping with scouts, we were in the middle of the forest, sleeping right by a creek. I woke up in the middle of the night to a crackling sound, looked around the tent, saw my two other friends sleeping, and could hear the scout leader snoring in the other tent, so I laid back down. Just as I did, the sound got closer and louder, probably no more than 100 feet away, coming through the woods. It sounded really similar to fire, except there was no light, and it seemed to walk, as I could hear tree branches snapping and whatnot. I was frozen with fear, laying there until the sound was just outside my tent. Again, no light. After a few seconds, I heard it hit the creek, making a hissing sound. It continued by crashing through the bushes away from us, but much faster than the approach. We did have older scouts at nearby camps, so I attribute it to pranks or some sleep paralysis, but damn, was I scared. I never brought it up, and it was never mentioned. I still remember hearing that sound through the snoring. Last weekend I was at a campout with a bunch of bands that recorded at the same studio, so the engineer threw a big party. At one point, I was talking to a buddy when all of the sky just lit up and I saw a giant flash. Like a ball of light. It was a cloudless night. It was like lightning, a ball that appeared and disappeared within an instant. Everybody just kind of blew it because they were wasted, but I'm very curious. If anybody has any type of explanation, that'd be cool. When I was in high school, I rode horses competitively and would often go to a local barn to practice. The way the place was set up was that there was a covered arena, and then right across from it was a huge barn that you could see straight through. Anyway, one night it was getting pretty late, but the sun was just setting due to it being summer. I was riding my horse alone in the arena except for one other man, who was doing his own thing. The handymen were feeding the horses in the big barn, so every time I'd ride by, I'd watch. Since the sun was setting, I could only see their silhouettes due to the poor lighting. I don't believe in anything supernatural, so the next part really freaked me out. As I rode by the barn, I saw a handyman crossing the walkway. Except halfway through, the form appeared to turn into a dog and lay down. It took me a second to process what I saw, and the next time I rode by, there was just a dog lying in the middle of the walkway. Needless to say, this really freaked me out. I knew I had seen a man, and now it was a dog. I stopped riding, didn't bother washing down my horse, loaded him up, and drove home. When I got home, I went out to our own barn to rinse him off and let him graze for a while before putting him up. My own dogs, German Shepherds, were all in the barn, which was weird because we usually let them in at night. As soon as I enter, they start barking, and my big guy, Poco, starts nipping at my heels, which is very out of character for him. Another one of my dogs, Louie, just sat near the barn door, staring out into the darkness, very alert. Obviously, at this point I'm incredibly on edge, thinking maybe someone had been in there trying to steal our horses, which would explain why my dogs were being so aggressive and why Louie was on such a lookout. I go into my house to wash up and ask my parents if they have seen anyone, and they're all around the kitchen table looking at pictures from one of our motion sensor deer feeders. The pictures show one of our goats being mauled by a mange-y coyote, no, not a chupacabra, and eaten. Again, very weird because our dogs are very good at keeping an eye out. Needless to say, the whole night was very creepy, and to this day, I'm convinced that the coyote and dog/human I saw at the barn are the same animal. I'm a rational person who doesn't believe in supernatural shit, so for a long time I questioned what I'd really seen. However, it all seemed very real at the time, so I'm convinced it was. Mountains of central and eastern NY State. I am 21 and staying alone at my family's very rustic wooden cabin in the forest. One wall has 3 big windows that open upward, latching to the ceiling. The windows had screens. It was 2 a.m., and I was writing at a table by the window by lantern light. It was midsummer, and the sound of the cicadas was loud. Some moonlight is filtering onto the forest floor outside the cabin. I turned the kerosene lamp off and got into the cot, which was 6 from the window. It was a single-room cabin. I was sitting there listening and thinking, looking at the big swath of screened windows facing the forest. 10 minutes passed. Suddenly and without any noise, a row of about 10 mostly naked men walked past the windows, going from right to left. They were Native Americans. They all had sleek, dark, long hair pulled back. Each carried something, maybe a sack or sticks or bows, on their backs. They walked 2 feet from the cabin wall without making any sound at all. When the last one passed, they were gone. They appeared, passed, and then were gone. That's my memory of that night. A couple years ago, when I was about 13, my dad got a call from a friend of his. A friend had shot a huge, 8-point whitetail buck and lost it the night before. The deer was shot with a bow at sunset and ran into the woods. Dad asks if I want to learn about tracking deer. I'm all for it, off we go. This is on Maryland's eastern shore. Lots of woods, lots of hills, lots of walking, I'm having a blast. Blood trail, fur, the whole thing is fun for me and my dad. We've been out there for maybe an hour. I take a break near a small group of trees that connect to the massive woods where the blood trail went. Dad's friend goes into the woods, and I'm just looking at the trees. Then I saw something. It was hard to see it, and it's been about a decade since, but I saw what looked like a fox, with a short muzzle, no tail, and really long limbs. Like deer-length ducking pencil limbs. It's just standing there, maybe 20 yards from me. That's not the weird part. That thing kind of got lopped away. Like those cat videos where the cat is scared, lifts its front feet off the ground, and runs off on its back legs? Like that, it only held its front legs higher, and it ran like that was the way it had run its entire life. Like that was natural. Dad scared the snot out of me by shouting about the 8-pointer being found. I told Dad I saw a weird animal. He said it may have been a fox. I told him about the legs being weird. He gave me the look. The look that says stop making SHT up. Well, I learned how to gut, drag, and track a deer that day. As for what I saw, I've always had a big imagination. I could have been sleep deprived, because 6 a.m. on a Saturday at 13 years old is bullshit. Maybe it was just a fox that moved weirdly. Maybe it was a deer with a weird head. I don't know. But I do know that deer and foxes don't run on their back legs. When I was about 10, my dad kept dreaming about this child wanting him to play with it, and while dreaming, he made an incoherent sound like someone was choking him. My room was next to his, so every time I heard him make that sound, I'm a light sleeper, I went straight to his room and woke him up. Things went on like that until one night I heard that sound again, and when I was about to enter his room, I remembered that he had gone to the hospital to take care of my grandpa, so I was the only one home that day. I stopped at the door, terrified, and started walking backward to the front door, opened it, and went to my neighbors for help. The woman next door was so kind that she made me hot chocolate and let me stay in her house until my dad picked me up in the morning. He had never left me alone at home again. My mom and aunt have an interesting story about an old haunt. They grew up in the hollers in eastern Kentucky. One night, when they were 7 or 8 years old, they were sleeping in their grandma's house when my aunt awoke to someone whispering her name from the end of the bed. She said it sounded so terrifying that she was afraid to look, but it kept doing it. She shook my mom enough to wake her up, and my mom, too, heard it calling my aunt's name. They had the blankets over their heads, and my mom finally got the courage to look down to the end of the bed. She said there were 2 male figures, bloody, slightly decaying, and looking like they had been in a car accident. The figures stood at the end of their bed all night, whispering their names, while my mom and aunt hid under the blankets. The figures eventually vanished before dawn. My mom and aunt swear truth to this story still today. I've asked them to tell me it many times over the years, and it never changes. My aunt hates talking about it because she thinks it could invite them in. Anyway, when they told my grandpa about it that next morning, he said that he knew several people who had similar experiences and that those figures were called Bloody Bones and Rawhead in that area. I think I was 10 or 12. Walking down towards the stairs at some grandparents' house, I had a creeping realization that something was walking behind me. When I reached the half of the stairs that had a sharp bend, I froze. As if something not of this world paused my brain and muscles, causing pins and needles and tingling sensations all over. It felt like I was being sucked away from this world, but at the very last sliver of that moment, my body moved by itself without me. I jumped down a very tall flight of stairs and did a roll on the marble grounds. I was very agile when I was a kid. When I came to a stop, I looked up. It was there. He? She? It? A shadow person. I can't recall the height, as it was up on the stairs looking down. It doesn't have any features, it's just a shadow in humanoid form. I can clearly feel it looking right at me. It has depth, it is a physical structure in humanoid form. Not just like any normal shadow. Standing there. It was slightly muscular with fairly long hands, but still within normal human range. Yet the strangest thing is that the moment I saw it, I didn't feel fear. The feeling was like the exact moment when your body reacts to news so amazing that you freeze. Not horror, not joy, not shock, but that split moment when you realize that something out of this world is happening to you. Like receiving news that your wife is pregnant, that you won the lottery, or that you just got an unbelievable promotion at work. That split-second reaction that takes over your entire body stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then, as I attempt to comprehend what I am looking at, it slowly dissipates, pixel by pixel. Not from any corner but as if in random spots with ever-increasing fluctuations, until it just disappears. My mother is from a rural village in Nova Scotia, and several times a year we would drive a few hours up there to be with my grandparents, uncles, and stuff. I had a few cousins that lived nearby who were around my age, so we often hung out. Because they lived in the country, we would often spend time in the woods, especially on the neighbor's land, where he parked a lot of old cars and cut them up for scrap and parts. We had great fun smashing out windows up there. Anyway, I was out in the woods with a younger cousin one day walking around. We were probably about 9/10-ish, and we came back out from the woods onto a trail that led down to the top of the field behind their house. We were walking down it when we heard something behind us and both looked back. To this day, I am not sure if I have exaggerated what I saw, but I know that we both saw something because, without exchanging words, we both started running down the trail to home. When we got there, we each told each other what we saw, and we both saw something bipedal, completely black, and somewhat shaggy cross the trail behind us from one side to the other. In all likelihood, we saw a bear, but both of us described it as walking upright and looking in our direction. I don't remember it looking like a bear, but besides a Sasquatch, I can't imagine what else it would be. The time I was pushed down the stairs by a shadow man when I was 14. My friend Gracie lived in a gorgeous old house in an area called Missionary Ridge, where a battle in the Civil War was fought. Sort of an exciting area for the ghost hunting type. She has always been able to see things. Particularly the shadow man, a dark figure that liked to hang around on the 3rd floor of the gigantic house. Her little sister, maybe 5 at the time, decided she wanted to play hide and seek. Gracie and I ran up to the 3rd floor without thinking. The moon was full and bright through the window as we leaned over the banister to see if her sister was following us. We heard a loud thud right between us, saw a dark figure run away from us down into the hallway, and then it started running back towards us. Gracie screamed and ran down the stairs. I ran after her. Right when I got to the edge of the stairs, I felt ice-cold hands on my back, and I tumbled all the way down. At first, I tried to rationalize it. My legs are short, and my pants always drag the floor. I totally tripped over my pants. Or I slipped on the immaculate, shiny wood floors. Nope. Gracie screaming Mom. The shadow man shoved sap heroings down the stairs. Cleared that up for me. My girl had recently dumped me, so my insomnia had kicked in full speed ahead. I was bored and lonely, and I started taking late-night drives in my parents' minivan, a good old Dodge Caravan. A cute red-headed friend of mine often accompanied me on these trips. Bless her for keeping me company. It was about 2 or 3 a.m., and we were driving around a suburb near the all-female college in town. This particular suburb and the college are right next to a wildlife conservation area. Well, I stop for a stop sign at a T-junction. I'm heading straight through, and the road ahead goes for maybe 50 meters, then makes a right turn down a hill. Beyond the right turn are the buildings for the college. I glance to my right to see if anyone's coming. But then I see my friend's face when I do so, and damn, she's gone completely white, and her eyes are wide as saucers. Wondering what the hell she's looking at, I look forward, and holy friggin' hell. Crossing the street in front of me, maybe 20 meters ahead and illuminated from behind by a bright light from a building, is something tall, walking on 2 legs, with a goddamn mane of hair. And it was walking so smoothly. I'll never forget it, it almost glided across the road. There was no head bob. Being the adventurous soul that I was then, I actually went in pursuit. I drove forward and made a left into the parking lot. The parking lot is for the college, and behind it is the conservation area. But just as I was fumbling around for a flashlight to go after the thing, my friend, probably wisely, grabbed my arm and refused to let me go. I'll always wonder what I saw that night. Even creepier, it turned out to be a full moon. Go figure. I probably would have dismissed what I saw as my own imagination, but I can't really do that when I'm not the only one that saw something out there. My aunt told me once that our small, isolated town had an elder come visit from another small nearby town. He was situated in a cabin a little bit on the outskirts, right up against Ungava Bay. The next morning, when no one saw him in town, someone went to check up on him. He wasn't in the cabin. A few weeks later, they finally heard from him. He claimed that in the middle of the night, a man in a traditional Inuit getup, sealskin snow pants and a sealskin parka with wolf fur on the hood, came into the cabin, shook off his boots, made his way silently to the stove, threw in some wood, and started warming his hands. Alarmed, the elder called out to the man. When the man turned around, the elder was met with no face. Just a face made of skin. In complete shock, he grabbed his parka and boots and got the hell out of Dodge. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar with and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was that if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day, the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 and 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting, and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more often waddle on 2 legs. When I was 21, there was a huge obsession around a rumored ghost on a motorcycle that chased your speeding car on a long stretch of road, Lemon Tree Passage, NSW, Australia. Me and my friends tried speeding along the road multiple times without experiencing ghosts. One day we drove there as a joke and pulled over on the side of the road to see if other people would be speeding along trying to catch a glimpse. From out of nowhere, a single headlight came from the road behind our parked car, and a motorbike sped straight past us. All of us stopped breathing. I remember my eyes watering so fast and one of the girls in the back of the car screaming from being so scared. The motorcycle rider was not an apparition. It was a solid, real-looking person on a bike. Except the bottom half of the motorcycle tires didn't exist. It was like he was floating, but you could see him clearly and hear the exhaust. Not just that, but he disappeared into thin air right in front of us. We were not on drugs or alcohol, and half the people in the car did not even believe in paranormal stuff. We cried all the way home and never spoke about it again, and to this day, thinking about it makes my heart race and my eyes water. I will forever question if what all of us saw was real. We all saw the same thing. We all saw him disappear. Okay, 8 years ago, I went home to Cape Cod for Christmas. My mother lives in Florida for the winter, and my sisters were coming in later in the week. I get home about 5 days before anyone else. We have had the house for years, and it's big and old and creepy, but I love it. This is the year 2008 or 2009, when there was a huge snowstorm before Christmas and the Cape was buried for about a week because they didn't have the right infrastructure to deal with that amount of snow. Anyway, I got snowed in, the power went out, but I had a generator, so no big deal. 2 days into being home, I head to the bathroom in the middle of the day with nothing weird going on at all. The bathroom is across the house on the first floor from the TV room. I walk over, through our sitting room, think fancy family room. It has 4 large chairs, 4 couches, a grand piano, and a table with 8 chairs, do my business, and walk out of the bathroom no more than 1 minute after going in. And freeze. Every single chair, couch, and even the piano bench are upside down. I heard nothing, not one peep, no footsteps, nothing. There is no way a team of less than 10 people could have done it in less than a minute. Not a chance. So I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and called the cops. I stepped outside on the porch to wait because there could be people in my house and duck that noise. That's when I note that there are no footprints leading up to the house, the road is still closed, and the snow is totally unperturbed as far as I can see down the road in either direction. Cops came behind a plow to check the house and did a circle of the house, finding no footprints leading to or away from the house. I let them take me to a hotel. I haven't slept in that house since. Mother still doesn't believe me to this day and gets super angry when I come to visit but get a hotel room. When I was 2 years old, my parents and I lived in a house that my grandparents owned. Although I was only 2, I apparently could speak quite well in full sentences. My parents' bedroom was connected to mine through the closet, meaning you could walk into their closet, go through a door in the back, and end up in the back of my closet. My mom started having these terrible nightmares. In her dream, she would wake up surrounded by fire. She'd rush through the closet to my room, scoop me up, and dive out the window. Suddenly, it would flash forward, and she and my dad would be sitting in a waiting room at a hospital. A doctor would come in, looking somber, and say, "I'm sorry, but..." She'd wake up at that point, sweating profusely and with her heart racing. One night, she woke up to me screaming. She ran into my room and pulled me into her arms, calming me down and asking me what was wrong. My response was, Mommy, my room was on fire. I was on fire. Of course, this freaked her out. I'm willing to admit that my having some sort of similar nightmare may have been caused by me overhearing a conversation about my mom's nightmares, but that's not the freaky part. Not too long after this, we moved out, though not because of the nightmares my mom was having. We lived in southern Illinois at the time, and my parents were having a hard time making enough money to support us living there, so we moved up to northern Illinois. My grandparents sold that house once we moved. About 6 months after we moved out, my mom was talking to my grandma on the phone. My grandma started telling my mom about how the house we used to live in had caught on fire. No one was home at the time, but the bedroom that had been mine had been completely destroyed. The fire had started because of an electrical short in the closet I spoke of before. This story always gives me chills. Here's mine. I'm pretty freaked out. That thing has been there for almost a week. The figure in the window, it looks featureless, only skin on a human frame, and it's pressing itself against the glass somehow. I don't know how it got there, and I don't know how to get rid of it. At first, I thought it was a prank, a doll or mannequin that some jerks put there to scare me. But I realized as I walked out of my house to pull it away that it wasn't there. I shrugged it off, thinking that someone had hidden it while I was walking through my door. But I went back in and looked out that same window, and it was looking in, staring at me. I walked around my house, yelling for whoever it was to come out, but no one was there. The thing is hairless and naked, and it didn't look like it actually had eyes or even a face at all. But its head is turned towards me when I enter the room. When I sit on my computer, I can feel its faceless hatred bore into my neck. But when I turn around, it's innocently turned in a different direction. Finally, on Thursday, I tried to open the window, but it was stuck. I think the thing's hands are keeping it down. But I got a good look at its face. Its eyes and mouth are behind the skin, pushing outward. It stared at me, smiling. I pulled back a fist and smashed it onto the glass, determined once and for all to get rid of the glaring monster. I know I'm strong enough. That glass should have cracked. But it didn't. It shuddered under my hand, but it didn't break. And that smile just got wider and wider and wider, until I thought its head would break in half. It raised its own hand and bashed the window with its palm. It was mocking me. But I saw the faintest crack begin to appear where it had hit, and I backed away. No way did I want that smile in the same room as me. So I got a roll of duct tape, and I started covering the window. I couldn't look directly at it. I nearly spit on my pants just knowing it was watching me. But I couldn't help it. I took a quick glance at that skin-covered face. A small peek. It was angry. That menacing grin was now a gaping frown full of teeth. The skin had ripped away from its mouth, and I could see down its cavernous throat. A menacing rumble started to fill the house, and that hairline crack began to spread like splintering ice. I pulled down the duct tape. The rumble stopped, the split skin healed over, and it began to smile again. Now it's night, and the noise hasn't started again. There are no sounds, no rumble, no crackling glass. Everything's quiet now. But I can feel its claws gripping the back of my chair. I can hear its skin stretching as it smiles. It's watching me. A man went to a hotel and walked up to the front desk to check in. The woman at the desk gave him his key and told him that on the way to his room, there was a door with no number that was locked, and no one was allowed in there. No one should look inside the room under any circumstances. So he followed the instructions of the woman at the front desk, going straight to his room and going to bed. The next night, his curiosity would not leave him alone in the room with no number on the door. He walked down the hall to the door and tried the handle. Sure enough, it was locked. He bent down and looked through the wide keyhole. Cold air passed through it, chilling his eye. What he saw was a hotel bedroom like his, and in the corner was a woman whose skin was completely white. She was leaning her head against the wall, facing away from the door. He stared in confusion for a while. He almost knocked on the door out of curiosity but decided not to. This disinclination saved his life. He crept away from the door and walked back to his room. The next day, he returned to the door and looked through the wide keyhole. This time, all he saw was redness. He couldn't make anything out besides a distinct red color that was unmoving. Perhaps the inhabitants of the room knew he was spying the night before and had blocked the keyhole with something red. At this point, he decided to consult the woman at the front desk for more information. She sighed and said, "Did you look through the keyhole?" The man told her that he had, and she said, "Well, I might as well tell you the story. A long time ago, a man murdered his wife in that room, and her ghost haunts it. But these people were not ordinary. They were white all over, except for their eyes, which were red." A bit of backstory: our old home saw a lot of death. My stepfather's first wife died in the master bedroom from cancer. My stepfather hanged himself in our garage. My stepbrother was shot in our driveway. It was a perfectly normal, average suburban neighborhood, by the way. Anyway, weird SHT always happens. Doorknobs turning and doors opening, seeing weird lights in the hallway late at night, just weird vibes and shit. We had to move after my stepdad died. It was too much for us all. The house just felt evil to everyone. You know how it goes. Anyways, fast forward a few months, and we're in a new house, but one of the doors has a huge hole in it for whatever reason. Cue my brother, who suggests he and I go to our old house, which is empty now, and grab a door from the frame there. Anyhow, we decided to go around 5 or 6 in November, so it got dark fast, and all we had were the crappy lights on our shitty Nokia phones to guide us. The very moment we enter, we're both filled with an instant sensation of dread, which chills us to our respective cores. We both agree that it's best to be quick about it. We went to measure the doors, spent 10 minutes doing it, and looked over our shoulders because we honestly felt we were being watched. Brother says we should leave and come back with the tools tomorrow when there's more light. That is when the weird SHT hit. We were walking down the main hall when my brother asked me if I had said something. Apparently he heard a voice. We pick up the pace, and as we enter the living room, we hear a loud hiss, like a cat, and our shitty flashlights jump to the corner of the living room, and that was when we saw it. ISHT you not, we both looked at this little gremlin creature thing, this nasty mass of black with beady eyes, humanoid in appearance, looked at each other to confirm we were seeing the same shit, looked back, and it was gone. Oh shit. We screamed and got the duck out of there as fast as physically possible. Brother sped our asses home, and we've refused to go around that house since. My dad owns a place in Northern Ontario, Canada. He's a big-time hunter, and he likes to take me and my brother with him to his property to hunt sometimes. He has a small cabin he built himself. There is a small window next to the roof, about 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I remember one night I was sitting in a tree stand watching for deer. It was fall, so the temperature wasn't too cold. As I was waiting in the stand for my dad to give me the signal to pack up and head back to the cabin, the air around me got really cold in a matter of seconds. There was no breeze, it was just cold. As I was walking back, I kept getting the feeling that something was right behind me, almost breathing on my neck. Fast forward, I was laying in bed with my dad dead asleep on the other side of the room. It was late, like 4 a.m. or later. I remember looking at the wood stove my dad installed a week before this. I looked up at the window I mentioned earlier and saw the head of a deer staring at me. It had long antlers and clear white eyes. For the deer to be looking through that window, it had to be 9 or 10 feet tall. I remember staring at it for what seemed like hours. My dad made a noise that made me switch my gaze, and when I looked back, it was gone. I had that same feeling when I was walking back to the tree stand. I didn't sleep that night. When my dad woke up, he started packing his things to leave. We left in the morning, and I never told him what happened, and my friends think I was bullying them. Anyway, I will probably never forget that trip. A buddy of mine, Jay, has always been into paranormal stuff and has always scoured the internet, back when it was cool, for any paranormal he could get his eyes on. Jay lived 5-ish miles out of town in a rather big house. Apparently it used to be smaller, but they added on to it at some point. So whenever I would go hang out with Jay and not smoke anything illegal, I would frequently crash in his sister's room across the hall since it was usually empty. Anyway, I always kind of got the heebie-jeebies, like I wasn't alone in there, but I never thought too much about it since I wasn't smoking illegal things. Also, for whatever reason, his sister had a boatload of those glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling that I wouldn't frequently get lost in. One day I was there hanging out with him and his mom. She would cook us munchies, and they started talking about Herbert. I was like, who? So they explained that he was some guy that used to live in the older house that they had added on to. Apparently he died some sort of bloody death. It involved an axe, I think. Not totally sure. But apparently, where it happened was right outside Jay's sister's room. That's also where the old house used to end. Jay then told me he sets up cameras and microphones and catches stuff on occasion, but nothing too crazy. He also knows I've had some weird experiences with the paranormal and said I'm something like a hypersensitive person or supersensitive. Anyway, he asked me if I would sleep in her room, and before he could explain, I agreed. I also learned later that he planned to use me as bait. Flash forward to the next morning, when we wake up. We end up watching the movie, and it's pretty normal. You hear his mom walk around and eventually flip off light switches and go to bed, as well as his cats here and there. Around 2-ish. Maybe you hear these super loud stepping sounds up the stairs and steps by the sister's room, and then silence. Then maybe a little while later, it happens again. Then once again, it's like someone is stomping up the stairs to stare into the room, only to vanish. You never hear them leave. On the final time, you hear the stomping all the way up, and then you can see when I get up to go to the bathroom between the rooms. You can hear an angry gasp or grunt. Then some angry sounding things, and then like someone was running away from me. And that was really it. I remember getting this weird pins and needles feeling just in my legs really intensely. It was like a hot and cold shock at the same time. Anticlimactic, I suppose, but when I think about it, it still gives my legs the shivers, lol. One night, a woman went out for drinks with her girlfriends. She left the bar fairly late at night, got in her car, and drove onto the deserted highway. After a few minutes, she noticed a lone pair of headlights in her rearview mirror, approaching at a pace just slightly quicker than hers. As the car pulled up behind her, she glanced and saw the turn signal on. The car was going to pass, when suddenly it swerved back behind her, pulled up dangerously close to her tailgate, and the lights flashed. Now she was getting nervous. The lights dimmed for a moment, and then the brights came back on, and the car behind her surged forward. The frightened woman struggled to keep her eyes on the road and fought the urge to look at the car behind her. Finally, her exit approached, but the car continued to follow, flashing the lights periodically. Through every stoplight and turn, it followed her until she pulled into her driveway. She figured her only hope was to make a mad dash into the house and call the police. As she flew from the car, so did the driver of the car behind her, and he screamed, "Lock the door and call the police. Call 911. When the police arrived, the horrible truth was finally revealed to the woman. The man in the car had been trying to save her. As he pulled up behind her and his headlights illuminated her car, he saw the silhouette of a man with a butcher knife rising up from the back seat to stab her, so he flashed his lights, and the figure crouched back down.